All right, I want to go through chapter 12 as briefly as I possibly can. I realize these videos are not the most ideal way to interact with a teacher, but this is where we're at. I want you to notice first off on my screen here what you're supposed to be looking at here, something that looks like Congress. And if you'll see the handle there and what seems to be coming out of there, they have tried to epitomize Congress as what's called a hopper. I don't know if you know how sausage and other various kind of meats are produced, but they typically take huge piles of meat, put them in the top of the hoppers, and then just crank that thing down to produce sausage links and things like that. Because typically speaking, bill making is similar to sausage making, according to most of your government teachers. All right. And kind of the way they try to highlight this is to basically say that you don't necessarily want to know how the sausage is made, just know that it is made. And so if you look here, this is a pig, and the pig is kind of going through, and the pig comes into the hopper, and it comes out with, hey, look, that's a stimulus bill, okay? Which is something we actually just now went through in the middle of our, big coronavirus, everything that we've been talking about, right? And pig is pork. If you've never heard the phrase before, pork, they're the things that are added to bills to make them more palatable for certain senators, representatives to vote on. All right. So to give you an example, when we're talking about this, what you should see, like the stimulus bill we just now passed. Number one, all the Republicans in Congress were trying their very best to get as many things added to the bill that would basically be, a whole bunch of money that goes to a bunch of big businesses that doesn't have a whole lot of oversight. Democrats were specifically trying to add a whole bunch of this stuff to the stimulus bill that was not even closely related at all to the problem we're going through with the coronavirus, right? And so, in a coronavirus stimulus bill, we got $25 million that's being given to the what was it? It was the Kennedy Center for the Arts, which is not related to the coronavirus. And there was a whole bunch of things originally in there that related to everything from abortion to everything else. And it was a whole bunch of things that people were trying to take advantage of this situation. This is Democrats, this is Republicans that are trying to get their agenda pushed in the middle of this crisis. And if you remember talking a few months back, we were talking about how one of the major phrases you see in Congress is never waste a good crisis. And this is exactly what you've been seeing happening with the stimulus bill. Yeah, it's supposed to be related to the coronavirus, but you know what? If I can achieve the things I already wanted to achieve anyway with this thing, then I'm doing better that way. All right, so let's talk here a little bit about representing the American people. I'm going to go ahead and go into presentation mode here for a little bit, and I think my face might disappear, but that's okay. Number one, you need to know that the American congressional leadership, that the way our Constitution has been drawn out, we have a bicameral legislature. Okay. And by bicameral, that means that we have both a House and a Senate, and that those two things actually are representing the American people in different ways. The Senate is specifically representing the states, and the House is specifically representing the people. All right. And that may sound like they're kind of doing the same thing, but in essence, they're really not. They're not designed to be that way. The Senate is way more deliberative, which means that they get a huge, thorough public airing on everything that happens. And the House has a lot less deliberation when it comes to the way that they do things. And again, by deliberation, we're talking about the way they talk on the floors of Congress or on the floors of the House or the floors of the Senate, right? And so they have to make rules on how each body is going to function. All right. The second thing you need to understand is the word constituency. The word constituency is a reference to the people who are in a district, or who are you actually representing if you're a senator, if you're a representative. All right. In the House, there are 435 members. Okay, in the Senate, you'll notice there are 100 members. The House is based on population, and so therefore, more populous states are more. They have more representatives in the House of Representatives, and in the Senate, every state has equal representation, or two per state. All right, so every state, Oklahoma, every state has two members that go to the Senate. The House serves a two-year term, and the Senate serves a 6-year term. The House is they're elected by the voters in each district, whereas in the Senate, they used to, according to our Constitution, they used to be selected by our state legislatures. Now that's been changed because of the 17th Amendment, and the 17th Amendment provided for the direct election of senators, which means the citizens are the ones that now elect the members of the Senate. All right. The House and the Senate, they're different in specific ways. For example, the House, the members of the House of Representatives are way more reactionary, and you need to think about this. They serve a 2-year term, whereas the Senate serves a 6-year term. If people are irritated about the way the Senate is being run, they've got 6 years before they can actually make a change in their senator. Whereas in the House, they're basically always running for reelection. Okay, which makes them more reactionary. They have to adjust whenever there is a national crisis or something happening in the country in more specific ways. All right. The House is also more centralized and organized. And what that means is that the leadership in the House has a lot more power and there's a lot more structure. There's 435 members in the House, whereas there's only 100 in the Senate. So they're a lot less organized in the Senate to these things. In the House, the leaders have a lot more control over the legislative process, as in the House, there's a lot closer party discipline because, again, if you're always running for reelection and you always need the money from party leadership to get reelected, then you're always going to have to kind of fall in line there in ways that it's not necessarily the case in the Senate. In the House, members particularly specialize in specific areas. So if you were elected from the state of Oklahoma, you are likely to be a specialist when it comes to agriculture or oil, right? Because if you're not on the committees that deal with agriculture or oil and you're from the state of Oklahoma, you're not going to be able to represent your people very well. That's just the way things work. And then finally, in the House, they represent well-organized local interests because you're serving the members of your smaller district rather than the whole state. So let's look at the Senate. Again, everything that you see in the House is kind of the opposite a little bit in the Senate. They're more deliberative, which means they can talk and talk and talk about a single bill, whereas the House, they don't have so much debate. They set rules for these things. It's limited. It just works that way. There's a lot less organization in the Senate. Leaders have a lot less control, and the members are not necessarily encouraged to specialize, but they will still serve on specific committees, and you'll see that here in a little bit. So how do congressmen represent their constituencies? That's the main thing that we're going to see here. Again, so senators, they serve their state. Representatives, they serve their districts. And so there's a little bit of a difference there. Two kinds of representation we're going to look at. First off, a sociological. The second one is agency. So let's look at this. Sociological representation is a specific type of representation where representatives have the same racial, ethnic, religious, or educational backgrounds as their constituents. And what they're basically saying through sociological representation is that if you are a certain thing, if you are white, if you are black, if you are male, if you are female, if you are, whatever it is, that if you have somebody in Congress that is a lot like you, they will think a lot like you and therefore represent your interests. There's a little bit of a drawback to that, but one of the things you can see here in the chart is that we have seen a growth in Latinos and African Americans and women and serving in Congress over the last 20, 30 years. However, we are still nowhere close to actually having women, African Americans, and Latinos be representative of their specific ratio in the American public. In other words, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men are still way overrepresented in Congress as compared to these other minorities and women and stuff like that. All right. Still overwhelmingly Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. In terms of profession, as far as the jobs that people had prior to coming into Congress, lawyers have kind of always traditionally dominated Congress, and I think it will continue to be that way to some extent, just because lawyers understand the way law works, and so since you are the makers of law in Congress, then you're going to have a little bit of a leg up on your opponents in that. Women and minorities have made gains, but they're still lagging behind their actual representation. You can kind of look at this chart, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but this is on your presentation that you can look at and see the data here. We see the makeup here in the House, Democrat versus Republican, male versus female, lawyers, business education, stuff like that. And you can kind of see the way that stuff works. Veterans used to really dominate the way all this stuff works. But it is not so much that way anymore. We've seen those numbers decline over the years to see fewer veterans that serve in Congress. In terms of the failure of sociological representation, they do not mirror the American population, even though we have made gains. The absence of this representation, it threatens the legitimacy of Congress because government doesn't necessarily look like the populace of America, and so there's a good portion of America that just doesn't take them serious as an institution. There's another kind of representation called agency representation, and this is where they're held accountable to their constituency if they fail to represent that constituency properly. And basically what we're saying here, what is the job of a representative? Is the job of a representative to tell their people in their district what they believe and how they will vote, and then go and vote that way? Or is their job to always kind of keep a pulse on their district so that they know how people in their district already feel about a thing and then vote according to their district? In most all cases, we see that they are more likely to be the former rather than the latter. What I mean by that is that congressmen typically see their job as representing their own interests and telling the people in their constituency how they already feel about a thing and how they'll vote. If they are using polls, they don't use the polls to determine how they vote. They use the polls to figure out whose mind they need to change within their constituency, and that's kind of the way that plays out. Let me get past a little bit of that. In terms of serving constituency, if you're able to get some of these pork barrel projects added to a piece of legislation, it will excuse you on some of the typical stances that you've taken in the past. And what I mean by that is if you said, no, I will never vote for a bill that says this, and then you turn around and vote for a bill that does that, you had better get something to your people in return for your vote. And that's normally the way that the whole pork barrel thing ends up working. If I'm representing Ottawa County and I'm able to get specific things done for Ottawa County through a bill that's not even related to the topic of the bill, the people of Ottawa County are more likely to forgive me for voting against my own conscience and the things that I've declared in the past. I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff here. Constituent service, you can serve your constituency in specific ways. They'll do things like a private bill, and private bills have been used to help specific individual people get things done. If you're struggling with some red tape and a congressman sees your plight and they try to adjust those things, then you can get a lot of things done for your constituency by sponsoring such things. I'm going to skip some stuff. Let's look here. The three factors contribute to the composition of Congress. Number one, who decides to run. Number two, the incumbency effect. And number three, congressional redistricting. And we're going to talk about those things real quick. Okay. Who decides to run? Candidates are self-selected, as in they have to choose to run. And that decision is influenced by, what is actually your ambition? What is driving you to run? In other cases, we'll see that money and political action committees are going to, drive that influence. And then finally, the people of your district and everything like that will also kind of help decide who runs. And with the advantage of incumbency, what that means is that if you're the person currently holding office, you're way more likely to be elected because you have, number one, you have name recognition. You can engage in the things we talked about before, constituent service and pork barrel projects that bring things to your district. And you also hold the advantage of money, as in, if you are an interest group, you're way more likely to pour money on the winner because you want to influence the person who won. And so if you have already won, you're more likely to get more money from those interest groups than somebody who's running for the first time. There have been a lot of movements trying to set term limits in Congress. It has not been done yet, but there has been a lot of talk doing that because overwhelming advantage by being an incumbent is difficult to overcome. And a lot of people, myself included, wish there were term limits in Congress. Again, you can look at this chart and you see these things specifically, but it basically says this is the power of incumbency. You're more likely to win if you already have the seat than if you are challenging the person that already holds the seat. Congressional redistricting is also an advantage because if you're in office, if you're in that seat whenever years ending in 0 happen, you get to be a part of the redistricting process, and you can kind of help to draw those lines in a way that are going to benefit you. And a lot of people all over the country do just that, but I'm not going to spend a lot more time there because we've already said these things. This is what some of these districts look like, and we've talked about that before. Congressional districts have to be equal in population, according to these Supreme Court cases, and the Supreme Court has pretty much supported the one person, one vote principle. However, we'll also see that affirmative action or affirmative racial gerrymandering is something that really started taking place in the 1990s, but was eventually struck down by the Supreme Court in Miller v. Johnson and Bush v. Vera. I'm going to skip. We've talked about those things already. Let's just go ahead and skip. Okay, let's get into the organization of Congress. All right. In the House of Representatives, all right, the majority party has the Speaker of the House. Okay. Currently, that is Nancy Pelosi. You see her on the left. You have a majority leader in the House of Representatives, a majority whip that kind of keeps everybody in line, and then you have the Committee on Committees. In the minority party, you're going to have the minority leader, which again is currently Republicans in the House of Representatives. You have a minority whip, and you have a steering and policy committee. In the Senate, your leadership looks different. All right. The formal leadership in the Senate, we see that the vice president is actually the president of the Senate. However, there is a president pro tempore who actually serves that role. The vice president rarely gets involved there. That almost never happens, even though that is constitutionally what he's supposed to do, or she. It is so. There you go. The president pro tempore doesn't actually have power. He's there to basically represent the vice president, and it's generally given to the ranking member of the majority party. The informal leadership in the Senate, the majority leader has a whip, and the minority leader has a whip, and the whips serve to keep people in line. And then there is a majority policy committee and a minority policy committee. Let me go on here. In the committee system, there are standing committees, there are select committees, there are joint committees, and there are conference committees. Let's get into what these are. Standing committees are the most important because they're permanent. They will go from this session to the next session to the next session, whereas that's not necessarily the case with others. They have the power to receive and process legislation. Their jurisdiction is specified by subject matter, and their assignment is based on the needs of the members. And then finally, leadership is based on the seniority on that committee. So let's talk about what those standing committees kind of look like. In the House of Representatives, you can see that these are on the left side. These are the standing committees, as in like these are the committees that are always going to exist in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, these on the right side are the standing committees that will always exist in the Senate. You'll see that some of these things are actually similar in both the House and the Senate. And then if you'll see the numbers out to the right of each of those columns, you'll see that those are the numbers of subcommittees within those committees. So again, if you are from the state of Oklahoma, what you would see is that you really need to get on the agriculture committee, or you need to be on the energy committee, or the resources there because of oil. All right, those are our two main things in the state of Oklahoma: is agriculture and oil. Same thing when it comes to the Senate. You need to be on the energy and natural resources, or you need to be on the agriculture committee, because that's the best way to represent the businesses in the state of Oklahoma. But these are the standing committees. They always exist. Other committees we have are the Select Committee, the Joint Committee, and Conference Committees. All right. Select committees, for example, whenever Mr. Trump was elected, there was a select committee to investigate Mr. Trump and his that he may or may not have had influence from Russia and everything like that. There was a big probe, and so there was a select committee set up to specifically investigate that issue. Also, you have joint committees, which is when you have committees from both the House and the Senate that work together in a joint committee to come up with bills that will specifically address an issue. That way, whenever we get here in a little bit to how a bill becomes a law, you won't have the struggles of getting it past both Senate and the House of Representatives, because you've already kind of done that with your joint committee. And then you have a conference committee that is supposed to reach a compromise whenever you have legislation that's been passed by both of these. You also have within Congress what are called caucuses, and these are specific groups of people that are kind of informally gathered together. For example, the Congressional Black Caucus. These are all black members of Congress in both House and Senate, and they serve to be able to address and discuss things specifically relating to the plight of black people in the United States of America. Same thing with the Hispanic Caucus and Caucus for Women's Issues, and so you have those kind of things that do exist. How a bill becomes a law. This is a very, very, very confusing process. And I'm just going to go ahead and go to the chart here so you can see the way it looks. All right. Once legislation has been introduced, it has to be introduced first in the House or the Senate before it becomes an actual bill. It has to be given a number. So therefore, if it originates in the House, it will be HB or HR1 or SB or whatever one, and you'll give it a number because it comes from the House or the Senate, and that way you know which one you're voting on, right? Now, here we see in the chart that the Speaker of the House receives a bill. Okay, from there, the Speaker of the House is going to put it into committee, and then from committee, it's going to go to subcommittee. It's going to go to a hearings committee markup. Then it'll be sent to a rules committee in which they'll actually apply the rules in the House of Representatives on how that thing will be played whenever it gets to the floor of the House. And then from there, the House can send it to the Senate. The President of the Senate will receive the bill. He'll do the same thing, send it to committee, then to subcommittee. It can go through the hearings committee markup, then to the majority leader, then to the Senate floor. And again, the Senate has different rules that they operate by, and so it will go through some stuff there. Any bill can have an origin either in the Senate, in which point it will come through this process and then go to the House, or it can originate in the House, go through this process, and then go to the Senate. Okay. From here, the Senate can amend the bill. The House can amend the bill. It can be sent to the Senate floor, to the House floor. And then from here, we'll see that it will go to conference committee, which is the thing we we're just now talking about, in which they'll discuss those things, go down. It'll be given a conference report, and it can be adopted by both houses, and then sent to the White House. The president can either veto it or approve it. And there are various ways the president can do that. We'll get to that later. If the president does veto it, it's sent back to the House and Senate. And if they're able to get a 2/3 vote in both House and Senate, they can override the president's veto, and it becomes a law. If the president signs it, it can become law. If it's vetoed and they're incapable of overriding that veto, the bill is dead. There's a whole lot more ways that a bill is going to die than for a bill to actually become a law. Its chances of surviving and becoming a law are really, 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 really low, which is why how a bill becomes a law is a really, really long process. During this process of committee deliberation, it's usually decided and conducted at the committee level, and most of the bills are going to die at the committee or subcommittee level, as in like the majority of bills never actually get talked about on the floor of Congress. Most of them die long before then. The House Rules Committee will determine the length of debate and the nature of the amendments to that bill. And once they've set the rules for it, they can determine how it's going to happen. In the Senate, they don't have a Rules Committee, which means that they have no limits on the way things can be discussed and everything like that. On the floor of the Senate, they can use this thing called the filibuster, as in they can use it to talk a bill to death. Guys will literally get up there, and since there's no limit on how much one person can talk about a bill, they can use a filibuster to basically kill it by just talking and talking and talking and talking. You have to have 60 votes in order to end a filibuster in the Senate. For the president can sign the bill into law. They can allow it to become law without his signature, which is a pocket veto during Congress. Before that 10 days left of Congress or whatever, they can veto a bill with just a quick little signature there, or they can pocket veto, which means that there's less than 10 days left in a congressional session and the president doesn't sign it. If that's the case, it actually dies. So two ways for a bill to become law. Either A, he pockets it and there's still more than 10 days left in that congressional session and it becomes law. He signs it into law, or he vetoes it or gives it a pocket veto, which means that there's less than 10 days left in that session. In terms of the way Congress people behave, there are internal influences, and within that, we're talking here about party discipline. And the truth is, a bill going to the floor is something that they're going to pretty much know the numbers on before that ever happens. They kind of know the whip is in charge of basically knowing what the count is at any given point to make sure they know if a bill is going to pass or not. They don't really like surprises in Congress. And so they're going to kind of know who's going to vote. And there's some times in which party leadership, they're going to specifically tell people in their own party sometimes not to vote on something that they're on a bill that their party's actually in favor of. And the reason for that, let's imagine you have a Democrat from the state of Oklahoma that has actually managed to make it to Congress, and there's a bill that comes up about guns. Okay. If you're lucky enough to get a Democrat from the state of Oklahoma, you really don't want that Democrat to jeopardize his seat by voting on something that the overwhelming majority of Oklahomans are against, right? And so if there's a bill that restricts gun rights and you've got a Democrat from Oklahoma, there's a good chance party leadership is going to tell that Democrat, please don't vote for this bill because you're going to put yourself in jeopardy by doing that. But party discipline is something that is typically followed in the House, a lot less so in the Senate because of the reason we talked about at the very beginning. Oversight is another thing that you're going to be tested on here. And oversight is the effort by Congress through the hearings, through investigations, and other things to exercise control over the activities of executive agencies, the bureaucracy. We haven't got to that chapter yet, but this is the way Congress is able to exert influence over things after they have left Congress. And I think that is my last slide. So here's what I am going to do at this point. I'm going to go ahead and go to your chapter 12 test. I'm going to move my face out of the way a little bit here. And then what I'm going to do, if you have watched to this point in the video, I'm going to go ahead and show you what your answers are. All right. Let's get in here a little bit. Come on now. Load, load, load. Come on. Which of the following typically affects an individual's decision to run for office? You'll see that it's the strength of the individual's connections, the individual's abilities to meet the age and citizenship duration requirements, and the ability to raise money for his or her campaign. All of these things are correct. Following the 2016 elections, there were how many women serving in the U.S. Senate? The answer to that is 21. The first woman to serve in Congress was who? We see that is Jeannette Rankin. In each House district, there are approximately how many people? The answer to that would be 700,000 people. There are approximately what percentage of members of Congress have university degrees? That is actually 90% of members of Congress have university degrees. A senator representative running for re-election is called the incumbent. Okay, if they're running for re-election, they are the incumbent. A sophomore surge refers to the tendency for candidates to win a higher percentage of the vote when seeking future elections. The number of seats in the House of Representatives has been fixed at 435 since 1959. Gerrymandering is the manipulation of electoral districts to serve the interests of a particular group of people. That would be the first one. The term pork barrel refers to, let me see here, any piece of legislation that changes the number of agricultural subsidies. No, that's not it. It's appropriations made by legislative bodies for local projects that are not often needed for that specific bill. What kind of bills are the Congress's favorite vehicles for pork barrel spending? That would be highway bills. They're typically related to the pork barrel. Senators' longer terms of office and larger, more heterogeneous constituencies makes them more, you see here, likely to consider new ideas and better able to act as the agents for groups and interests. After the 2014 election, the Republican Party controlled both House of Representatives and Senate. There are how many states that have taken redistricting power away from legislatures, again, to independent commissions? That would be a total of 6. Supreme Court has ruled that state governments can use independent commissions rather than state legislatures to draw congressional boundaries. Which of the following statements best describes the representation of women and minorities? No, it's up here. Representation of women and minorities has increased during the past 2 decades, but they're still not equal to their number within the actual populace. Which of the following best describes the way in which the House differs from the Senate? The House is more centralized and organized than the Senate. It's one of the very first things I said in the lecture. Congressional organizations influenced by which of the following? All of these are actually correct. They are parliamentary rules of the House and Senate, political parties, and the committee system. Who decides which committee assignments members of House of Representatives receive? That would be each party's steering and policy committee. That plays a major role there. The jurisdiction of standing committees is, I think, right there, defined by subject matter of legislation, which parallels the major cabinet departments. Senate Watergate Committee of 1973 is an example of a select committee. It's kind of what we talked about earlier. The 4 joint committees in Congress, you'll see here is economic, taxation, library, and printing. I know that seems like an odd one, but that's the answer. Congressional staff members' responsibilities include, I believe that is in all of these. They draft legislation, handle constituents, negotiate with lobbyists. Organizational reforms instituted by Congress in the 70s. What they did there is they fragmented the power by reducing the power of committee chairs. A closed or open rule refers to congressional provisions regarding it's a floor debate on a bill. A filibuster allows members of the Senate to prevent a vote on a bill by speaking continuously on the floor. How can Congress override a president's veto? That has to have 2/3 vote in both chambers, right there. A bill's supporters in the House of Representatives generally prefer, what we got here, and a closed rule, whereas opponents generally prefer an open rule. A legislative hold is a stalling tactic that is used in the Senate to delay debate on a bill. The U.S. House of Representatives, virtually all the time allotted by the Rules Committee for debate on a given bill, is controlled by, let's see here, I believe that would be a bill sponsor and its leading opponent. Who is responsible for communicating the leader's wishes to members in Congress? That would be the whips. I told you they are the ones that keep everybody in line. Why does the House typically have greater party unity than the Senate? Because House leaders have more organizational control. Most members of the House attempt to stay on good terms with the Speaker of the House because the Speaker is the one that possesses the power of recognition, as in you're not even going to be allowed to speak on the floor of the House unless the Speaker recognizes you to speak. And if you don't ever get to speak, then you're never going to be able to be seen on C-SPAN. Your constituencies are never going to see videos of you fighting for them and things like that. And so people try to get along with the Speaker of the House. In addition to pressuring members of Congress to vote a certain way on a bill, interest groups have a substantial influence in doing what? They set the legislative agenda is what they do there. Oversight can best be described as efforts of Congress to supervise the way this is implemented by the executive branch. Your face is right there, Drenna. It's not necessary to be there. The Senate's constitutional power of advice and consent extends to the president's power to make treaties with foreign nations. What has the same status as treaties but does not require approval? That would be what's called executive agreements. Who were the only two presidents to be impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives? I believe that would be Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. The impeachment process is a partisan exercise entirely. Which of the following statements is most accurate? Let's see. Oversight power has increasingly been used. That is the very first one right there. All right. I did you a favor there, gave you the answers if you stuck here to the very end of the video. So enjoy and thank you.